it took this disaster all of a sudden for people to really start paying attention, right? And I'm wondering if there's anything else that people are not watching right now that I hope it doesn't take another disaster to make people pay attention to. But I don't know if you see anything on the horizon. And like I said, I'm asking you to have a crystal ball. But I'm just curious. I like to ask people because if I had asked you this question before the collapse, you would have definitely said, oh, it's going to be infrastructure. People are going to, they're going to get huge assessments and buildings are not in the shape they should be. I'm wondering if there's anything else that comes to the top of your head that you see maybe on the horizon. What do you think the next big item will be?
Think, and this might only partially answer your question too, but I think that was the wake up call for the buildings, people with buildings. And it's easy to say, oh, well, we don't have any buildings, we're fine, because people don't realize it's not their background, right? And so they don't realize when they're driving over this bridge that there's a lot of infrastructure associated with that, or all of the water and sewer piping that's serving their community. Do they own that, or is that maintained by the municipality? A lot of times associations do own that infrastructure, or the ponds with the dam. They don't see it, it's out of sight, out of mind, but huge infrastructure with a lot of implications. If you're not taking care of that dam, flooding through your whole community, or now all of a sudden you don't have water and sewer because those pipes failed and you haven't fixed them. So I think there's a ticking time bomb for HOAs as well that maybe isn't on their radar because they think, oh, well, we don't have buildings, it's not a problem for us. That's not our reality.
Do you think
And then I
people are
think,
not? You mentioned sewers and drainage and things like that, and I like that one because it's underground and it's out of sight. Do you think HOAs are going to have that be the next? It's not going to be a disaster that causes human life, I hope. But do you see that definitely as something that people are not paying attention to, and it's basically just going to go down at some point, and I would assume the cost would be huge.
huge, huge. And not all associations do maintain it. Sometimes the municipalities do maintain it. So it's important for them to understand what they are responsible for or not. If they have a common water bill and sewer bill, chances are the association does maintain it, and something they should. There's companies that specialize in piping, and they can do pipe studies where they kind of camera the lines and figure out exactly where they're located. A lot of these older communities, they don't even know necessarily where the pipes are. So it is important to get your arms around it. What infrastructure do we have? What shape is it in? Should we start piecemealing it? What's our plan? Right? It's very rare to go in and replace all of your piping at one time, but as you're doing pavement work, start to factor that in. Um, Even if you don't maintain the pipes, a lot of times there's these hidden retaining walls in different areas of the community, right? Those are super expensive to fix as well. Out of sight, out of mind. It's tucked back along a conservation area until it fails, right? So, and that's where a lot of times we'll see associations say, oh, we've got it figured out, we only have this monument sign, we don't need a reserve study. And I pull up an aerial and start, well, what about this, what about that? And it's you can't fault them, it's not their area of expertise, but that's why you bring in the professionals, right? Even if it's a one-time thing, to have a gut check on what you're responsible for and what the plan is, there's so much value in that.
Well, it's interesting because I asked you and I didn't know if you were going to have an answer. And then I find it doesn't take very long for professionals like yourself to actually come up with something. And it's the sewer and the drainage systems. I don't know what the lifespan of those. Can you answer that? What's the general lifespan of a sewer and drainage system?
Depends on so many things, because what are the materials of the pipe? What are the soils like? Like, is the area prone to a lot of settlement and that sort of thing? I mean, sometimes only 50 years, sometimes 80 plus, right? There are older communities or downtown areas where you've seen pipes that are beyond 80 years old and are now starting to fail. So it really does vary, which is why we always say we don't have a crystal ball either. We're not down there. You have to bring in the experts, but we'll at least have the conversation. What's going on? Ask some targeted questions, do a little bit of research on our own end to try and at least start factoring it into the association's plan.
You also mentioned dams. I was under the impression that dams are highly regulated, so I'm not as worried about dam disasters. Am I wrong?
So some areas they are, some areas they aren't. they, even when they are regulated, it's case by case with how well the municipality is able to keep up with it, right? In Virginia, I know they are regulated, but it's not uncommon for associations to not know that they're regulated or say they're 5 years past due. So it's one of those, even if they are regulated, it's on the association really to make sure that they are doing the proper maintenance and inspections that are required.
So I'm making a big mistake, I realize, because I know with building inspectors, I've done enough of these. I always tell people, look, the building inspector's just got one job to do. It doesn't mean that the building's theoretically safe or it's built well. I just made the same exact assumption with dams, didn't I? Correct, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Just because the state inspected it doesn't mean it's necessarily safe, right? We'd like to think that it is. It's supposed to be, but it may not be. You need to do your own inspection for dams.
Yeah, some areas you have to submit your own inspections to the state. So it's not that they have a list and they're going around and checking all these dams. You're just ideally supposed to do it. It's on the checklist, but depending on how stretched thin the municipality is, it might not even be on their radar or a priority for them, unfortunately.
That's why I like doing these sessions, because even someone like myself who interviews so many people, I just completely blew that one. I completely did not look at, I did not have the right approach to dam safety at all. So I'm glad that you mentioned it. So see that? You came up with two right off the bat with no prep. You had no idea what I was going to ask you. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. We saw this a lot, honestly, in Maryland. So when they passed the reserve study law a few years ago, there's a stipulation that if you have under $10,000 worth of any infrastructure, if all your capital components are under $10,000, you don't need to do a reserve study, which makes sense. New Jersey passed a similar rule in their legislation, and I think theirs was 25,000. So we have these associations. Well, we only have this wood entrance sign. So can you write off and say that, we're under $10,000? I said, okay, well, we can do that if that's right, but let's pull up an aerial and talk through it. And I said, oh, what about that pond? Oh, yeah, but we don't have to do anything with that. What about those retaining walls? Oh, those are going to last forever. And it's like, oh, you're quickly over that $10,000. So it's always good to just have a quick conversation, and that's great. Like, we're not going to charge for that. Let's have a quick call. Let's see, are you really only responsible for that? If so, great. Keep doing what you're doing. Replace the sign when you want, but let's make sure that that's right.
Retaining walls do make me nervous, though. I can absolutely see them having a failure where they could injure a large amount of people. Or look, you don't have to injure a large amount of people, right? You only have to injure one, and then everybody always feels bad. It always seems to be like some little cute kid or something. I find retaining walls could be dangerous if they're not maintained properly. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, they're intended to provide the stabilization and the differential between elevation. And if that's failing, certainly erosion, washout, structures can slide, kids playing on them thinking it's a nice little playground, right, on the fence. And then all of a sudden, maybe it's not fastened properly or it was unstable. Yeah, I mean, it's a structural component. They absolutely are important and need to be taken seriously.
That's a really good point about the kids, because I remember when I was a little kid, especially boys were so incredibly stupid, right? We're like the most stupidest creatures on the planet. And we were, now that you mention it, we were constantly playing on any kind of retainer wall. And we didn't have a fear at all. Like, it never entered my mind at all. We would actually be pulling rocks off them, I hate to say, they are incredibly dangerous. I hope this isn't going to be the next, I hope it's not going to take, an incident where someone is injured before, as an industry, we start looking at retaining walls. But now that you mention it, I don't know, maybe we should have some more. Do we have regulation to keep an eye on?
Some areas do, some don't. And it'll depend often on the height too. So like if it's a little timber retaining wall, 6 inches to get from a parking lot to, the sidewalk or something, that's not going to make or break much. So those are usually fine. You'd want to take care of it because it's going to cost more when you have to repave and that sort of thing if you're not, but no one's going to get seriously hurt, typically, knock on wood. But those bigger ones, usually there are some inspections required, but with municipalities stretched thin, it's unlikely that they're really keeping up with those requirements.
Hmm. I think if I was an association, now all of a sudden, if I had a retaining wall, I would definitely at least know the maintenance schedule on that, especially if there's no regulation in place. Um,
Well, that's
I
what
also think,
we'll put in our reserve studies is even if it's a, concrete wall or interlocking masonry that has a really long life, maybe some of them last 50 plus years, we'll put in there inspections and capital repairs just to get it as a component, like get it on the radar, have a structural inspection. You're probably going to have to do some minor repairs here and there. It doesn't have to be a full blown replacement to qualify as a reserve component. Those inspections and repairs are what help extend that life. You're not going to get that full life unless you're keeping up with it and taking care of it.
I think boards and managers also have a moral obligation too. If I was in that position and we had a large 12-foot retaining wall and it was in an area that people had access to, maybe there's a walkway nearby, or maybe kids are playing all over it. I think I would feel like I had a moral obligation to just say to myself, hey, when was the last time we had an engineer come out and at least talk to us about our retaining wall?
Right. Right. And it's not expensive to do those inspections. And then maybe there is an area that just needs some minor repairs, depending on what the materials are. I mean, it's so much more efficient, cost effective, liability. Like there's a zillion reasons why it's like anything else, right? Proactive maintenance. And it's shocking how expensive those big retaining walls are. You don't think of the ones that are behind homes, tucked along a conservation area, maybe drops 10 feet to get down to this. No one wants to spend money there, right? Out of sight, out of mind. What do you mean it's going to be six figures? I mean, $100+ a square foot to replace, super, super expensive.
Can you not have to replace them? They seem like, I'm just guessing here, they don't seem like an item that you could fix while they're still up, or am I wrong?
Depending on the material, you certainly can re- replace them until a certain point. Eventually, you'll have to fully replace it. But like those concrete walls, if you're keeping up with it and you see some cracks and you're crack filling, maybe there's some spalling occurring and you're taking care of it. Maybe the drainage, there's usually drainage infrastructure associated with those to get the water out. If you're making sure that those are clean and it's functioning properly, you're going to get a much longer life than as soon as that backs up, not draining, water's filling in. You know what I mean? Like it's like anything else. If you can properly maintain it, it will last longer.
Does anybody ever call you just because they saw kids playing on the retaining wall? Has it ever happened and somebody has said, you know what, we want to spend the money and have you come out and do an inspection just because we just want to be extra safe? I
You know,
think I'm not
I
going to be happy.
imagine we have gotten that call. I wouldn't doubt it. One that comes to mind more frequently is docks. We'll get that a lot for like docks or even playgrounds. And so there has been times where we've done an inspection and said, hey, this isn't our area of expertise. We can't rope this off, but you really should. Like, here's some photos. This is our concern. You might want to close it off until you can get this really evaluated and fixed.
I could see docks, right? Because it's an obvious one. You know, somebody's going to fall in the water and drown. But retaining walls, I'm already thinking, I'm already wondering if I should use some like kind of good click topics, like retaining walls, the absolute hidden danger that could, destroy lives. It wouldn't be
Maybe
too
not
far off if I
hidden.
did that.
No, and some of them aren't even hidden. Like, I mean, I remember inspecting a community thinking, boy, these are really bad. And they're right along a parking area. And they were pretty big. Took some pictures and recommended really near term repairs. Did the reserve study a few years later and they still hadn't been touched. And I was shocked that nothing more substantial had happened. I mean, there was more, they looked worse, but that something catastrophic didn't happen. And so did it the same thing again. That's all we can do is document it, send them over, encourage repairs. But it's scary.
If you don't mind me asking, do you have any kids?
Yep. Yep. 10 and 7.
Okay, boys or girls?
Older boy, younger girl.
All right, let me ask you. I was using myself as an example how stupid boys are. Um, do you want to avoid this question, or would you like to go on the record to say that the 10-year-old's a boy? They could be some of the most smartest. Like my kid right now is an adult, and he's like a genius, right? He's got like this genius job and everything. But I will tell you, as a 10-year-old boy, I didn't think he was going to survive in the world. He did the dumbest things. Would you agree that the boys are a lot dumber than the girls?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. And I'm married too. So my husband, I mean, I'm surrounded by dumb boys.
Oh, no, you even went further. Okay, well, you're very brave. All right, we'll leave it at that. But thank you so much. What is an HOA reserve study and why is it required?
So an HOA reserve study, or a condo reserve study for that matter, is an evaluation of all the community's infrastructure and components. And we put together at least a 30-year roadmap. CEI, Community Associations Institute, is kind of the keeper of the reserve study standards. So they require to go out at least 30 years. So we look at that 30-year period from now to 30 years in the future and say, okay, what capital projects is the association going to have to do? Do they have to repave their roads, replace their clubhouse roof, resurface their pool, replace their retaining walls, and put together that roadmap of expenditures and then a supporting funding plan. So how are we going to pay for these things? Ideally, gradually put money away each year. So when the time comes, you can pull right from that reserve or savings account to pay for it instead of special assessing or taking out a loan.
What happens if an HOA doesn't follow the reserve study?
Well, I always say in areas, so some areas you have to. They are required in some states where you have to conduct the study and you have to follow the funding recommendation. And those areas where you only have to conduct it and don't have to follow it, or areas where you don't have a requirement at all, it's still a best practice to do it, at least get your arms around the association's needs. And then I always say decide what works best for your community. Some associations don't want to fund the reserve account. They want to plan on a special assessment. Well, as a board, you have a fiduciary duty to inform the homeowners. This is what it costs to maintain our community. And if we're not going to build it into our dues, everyone be prepared for a $10, $15, $20,000 special assessment. Figure out what your plan is, whatever works best for your community, but you have to do the study to understand your needs to then determine how you're going to pay for your needs.
What does percent funded mean? I hear this all the time. What does it mean and what is
Yeah.
the percentage?
So percent fund, there's different funding methodologies. So you have all the needs of the community, right? What are the expenses? And then it's, okay, well, how are we going to pay for them? And so the most common way to do that would be the cash flow, where it's one big pot of money and you're going to pull from it when you need to, kind of like your own savings account. You got to do this project, that project, and you're going to pull from it. So that's cash flow. Now, percent funded is a different funding methodology where you're looking at it component by component and you say, okay, so the roof is going to cost $100,000, has a 20-year life, it's 2 years old, we should have 2/20ths the cost of the roof in reserves, right? So 100,000, 2/20ths, 10,000. You should have 10,000 in reserves. You do that for every single component, add up how much of all the components you've used, and then that's how much you should have in the bank. So what all of that totals to be $3 million, and you have $2 million in reserves, you're 67 or 2/3 funded, right? So that sounds bad. 67% funded. You think of like when you're in school, you're like, oh, that's a D, that's bad. I don't want to be 67% funded. And different providers will have different thoughts around it. Personally, we really lean towards the cash flow and say all of your components aren't going to fail at one time. You don't ever need to have all of these added up to be properly funded, right? If you're at 100% funded, you're overfunding. You have all this money sitting there. So we honestly don't even show the percent funded unless we're asked because it looks bad. You know, sometimes the recommendations for cash flow, we're saying, hey, you're adequately funded. And it might be only 40% funded, which sounds terrible, and it's not. So when we revised the reserve standards, we specifically added in adequate funding to get away from that. You don't need to fully fund reserves. You want to adequately fund reserves.
How much should an HOA have in reserve funds?
Ray, I wouldn't have a job if I could answer that question. We get that all the time. People walk up at a trade show and they're like, okay, can you tell us how much really of our budget should be? Should we do 15? Should it be 30? Should it be 5? What percentage? You can't, right? There's so many factors that play into it. What's the age of the community? What are you responsible for? How much have you funded in the past? Like how underfunded or overfunded are you? There's really no magic number. I can tell you, spoiler alert, Fannie and Freddie have that 10% of the budget requirement, and that is going to change in early 2026. Um, there's really just no magic number.
How do we know that our HOA is not going to be overfunded for reserves?
You don't. From time to time, there are associations that are overfunded. I can tell you it's usually pretty rare that we encounter that. And that essentially what we do is say decrease your contributions. We would never say just stop, take a 5-year hiatus on funding reserves unless you were really, really overfunded. Usually it is, okay, you're contributing, you know, $20 a unit a month. We think you can actually get away with 16. And so this is what that would look like. Or if you keep funding at your current level, this is what it would look like. Um, and it really comes down to sometimes funding methodologies. If associations have tried to kind of back of the napkin fund reserves, it does become more of a full funded, where you're funding by component, which is a pretty high contribution. And when you have a professional do it and they can do the cash flow methodology, it can result in a lower funding recommendation.
What reserve component ends up being the biggest shocker?
Good one. I think it's always the hidden components. So for condos, typically like pipes, out of sight, out of mind, those riser sections are really expensive. Um, or for community associations, usually infrastructure. So in areas where there's a lot of stormwater retention, ponds can be very expensive. And that's kind of a hidden shocker. Subsurface utility pipes, irrigation systems are super expensive. So it's usually the hidden components. People know that it's going to be expensive to, repave their private streets or to renovate the interior of their clubhouse. It's the out of sight, out of mind.
Can deferred maintenance invalidate a reserve study? I mean, can you even invalidate a reserve study? What does that mean?
Invalidate to me means basically you say it's not valid and kind of discredit it. And I guess so historically, or if you're trying to do like a software-based reserve study, I think the most common way to do that would be, what are the components? What's the typical useful life? How old is it? Okay, that's how much remaining useful life we have. So 20-year-old useful life roof, it's 8 years old. We'll show replacement in 12 years. And I'm guessing the question means if we have deferred maintenance and haven't kept up with inspections and partial repairs, you could argue that it's not going to get the full 20-year life, and therefore it's not valid because you're funding for inaccurate timing. Of course, a reserve study is not a crystal ball, right? So it's never going to get every project to the exact cost and exact timing, but deferred maintenance or preventative maintenance certainly should play into it. And that's why that inspection portion and having a qualified person prepare the reserve study is so important, because streets is another example, typically call it 20-year life. We've been to associations that have 24-year-old streets and they're in great condition. We wouldn't show replacement anytime soon because they've kept up with it. Or, we've been to communities that have 6-year-old pavement and it was just constructed improperly. They're not taking care of it. It's not going to get that 20-year life. So I think the understanding the maintenance that has gone into it and then the current condition certainly should govern those recommendations. So without that integral piece of it, it's really not a valid reserve study.
What percent funded could be a misleading HOA metric?
I think if you're 98% funded, you're probably overfunded and you're collecting too much and you have money sitting there. So you're not doing yourselves any favor. And I think there are very often times where adequate funding is more like 40% funded. So that seems terrifying, and you think you're in horrible shape and at risk of all these special assessments, and it's actually fine and adequately funded. So um, I think until you do the cash flow, it's hard to say what is proper funding.
What assumptions matter the most in a reserve study?
Ooh, good question. And I think it's the ownership responsibility. Truly, what is the association responsible for? And you'd be surprised how often associations don't know that. We always encourage associations, if your governing documents aren't clear, if you can't interpret them, we can't either. We're engineers. Bring in an attorney, work with someone that specializes in this to come up with that responsibility matrix. Get your arms around what everyone's responsible for. What's the association responsible for? What are homeowners responsible for? What's maintained by the municipality, or maybe the electric company owns the light poles and fixtures. Really get your arms around that, because without that, you're funding for things that you're not responsible for, or you're not funding for things that you are responsible for. So that's integral. And I think there is often a misconception that us as engineers are the ones to determine that. And that's not the case. We'll work with you and tell you what we commonly see and little tricks that we know to try and figure it out, but we are not the experts in that.
What economic cycles affect reserve planning?
I think that refers more to like external and inflation, certainly, right? It's a 30-year roadmap. We know there's going to be highs and lows with that inflation. So for that reason, it's always a more normalized rate. But anytime you see huge jumps in inflation, post-COVID, right, where we saw prices skyrocket. No one would have predicted that in a reserve study. So you really do have to update it to start reflecting those current costs. And it's a balance between being overreactive and trying to do it in the middle of it versus once things have normalized. And that really kind of depends on when do you need to do these projects. If it's a brand new community and your projects aren't, at least another, your big projects 8-10 years out, maybe let things kind of normalize. But if you know you're going to have to do a big deck project or roof project in the next year or two, you want to get your arms around that as soon as you can.
How does climate and usage patterns impact reserve projections?
That's huge. That's where useful lives aren't always the same, right? We know pavement in South Florida versus Arizona versus New Hampshire won't hold up the same. Same with metal components on the beach, right? The salt air, the corrosion. You're not going to get the same useful life for a balcony railing there as you would in, say, Dallas, Texas, right? So the weather absolutely plays into wear and tear on the components.
What reserve study red flags should be a warning?
Ooh, red flags. Do you mean if you're looking at your reserve study, something that you should look for, or would it?
Let's assume that they asked it in regard to they're talking to somebody about having a reserve study done, because everyone's coming out of the woodwork now that is doing reserve studies, right? And we've spoken about this
Yeah,
before. And there's a lot of great companies out there that do it. I'm not afraid to say that you guys are one of the great companies. And there's other great companies also, but there's a lot of people doing them that they
yeah,
really have no business in doing them. I don't know if you
yeah,
agree or disagree.
totally. Yep. Okay,
Well,
got it.
what is an easy red flag? Just give me the most obvious one that would be a warning sign that you're not just talking to the right kind of company.
I would ask for experience. How many of these have they done? Who's going to be preparing the reserve study? How many has that person prepared? And then certainly take a look at the report. Does it make sense? Can you read it? If you can't read it and understand it, or they can't help you understand it, you're not going to utilize it. So what's the point in doing it?
All right. Thanks for everything. All right.
No, thank you, and happy anniversary. Enjoy Miami.
Oh, thank you. All right.
Yeah.
Bye. Have a
Happy
good
New Year.
holiday. See ya.
You too. Thanks.